Let's talk about one of the most brutal, most decisive battles in all of human history. This is the story of a monumental clash that didn't just decide the fate of one city, It literally changed the entire course of World War II.
So, you have to ask yourself, how? How did the unbelievably powerful German war machine get completely bled white in the rubble of a single Soviet city? Well, that's what we're going to figure out. We're going to break down exactly how it happened, step by devastating step.
All right, here's our roadmap through the chaos. We're going to start with that initial German assault back in the summer of '42. Then we'll dive right into the absolute horror of the urban warfare. After that, we'll see the brilliant Soviet encirclement that sprang the trap, leading to that final, catastrophic surrender.
Okay, let's set the scene. It is August 1942. The German Sixth Army, we're talking a veteran force, really at the peak of its power, is pushing toward this key industrial city on the Volga River. A city with a name that means everything, Stalingrad.
You see, for both Hitler and Stalin, this was never just about strategy. It wasn't just about the oil fields to the south. No, this was personal. It became this ideological death match, and it was all centered on the city that bore the Soviet dictator's name.
And the Soviet resistance? It was just raw desperation. I mean, can you imagine seeing brand new T-34 tanks rolling straight off the factory assembly line and right into battle? Sometimes without even a coat of paint or proper gun sights. Everyone was thrown into the fight. Factory workers, civilian militias, even women and children were out there digging trenches under fire.
And this was the man in charge of holding the city itself, General Vasily Chukov. His words right here, they perfectly capture the mindset. There was no retreat. There was no surrender. It was victory or death. And he drilled that ruthless idea into every single soldier he had.
And just to make sure the message was clear, Stalin himself made the stakes brutally simple. He issued Order Number 227, famously known as not one step backwards. He even had special barrier troops placed behind his own front lines with one job: shoot any soldier who tried to retreat. The choice was just grim: face the German bullets in front of you or Soviet bullets from behind.
So once the Germans actually pushed into the city, the battle completely transformed into something uniquely horrible. It became this close-quarters nightmare in a landscape of rubble and ruin. The soldiers themselves had a name for it. They called it the Rat War.
But the Soviets, well, they adapted brilliantly. They knew they couldn't possibly compete with German air power and artillery, so General Chukov ordered his men to hug the enemy, to stay so incredibly close to the German lines that the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, couldn't bomb them without hitting their own troops.
The two approaches were just night and day. The Germans were built for open-field warfare, tanks, artillery, planes. But the Soviets? They turned the city's ruins into a fortress. They used the sewer system to pop up behind enemy lines. They fought from every shattered building and turned every single pile of rubble into a machine gun nest. And this hellish landscape, it created the perfect hunting ground for one type of soldier in particular: the sniper. A deadly shadow war just erupted in the ruins, where a single, perfectly placed shot could change everything in an instant.
And the most famous of all these hunters was a man named Vasily Zaitsev. He became a Soviet hero, a living symbol of the city's tenacious defense. Get this, he racked up an astonishing 225 confirmed kills. His story really personifies that lethal individual combat.
Now, while all this brutal fighting was consuming the city, the Soviet High Command, led by the brilliant General Zhukov, was planning something massive. So let's zoom out, way out, from the city streets to the grand strategic map. See, the German obsession with taking Stalingrad street by street created a huge, critical weakness. To keep feeding troops into the city, they stretched their front lines dangerously thin. And worse, they used their allied Romanian and Italian troops to guard the flanks. These troops, they were poorly equipped, their morale was low, and the Soviets knew it.
And this was the plan, Operation Uranus. On November 19th, bam, they smashed the northern flank. The very next day, they shattered the southern flank. And within just a few days, those two massive Soviet pincers met. And just like that, the hunters became the hunted. The entire German Sixth Army was trapped.
This forced an absolutely critical decision on the German commander, General Paulus. He knew he probably could fight his way out if he acted immediately. But the order from his Führer, from Hitler, was absolute.
So now we move to the final, tragic act of this battle.
The fate of nearly 300,000 German soldiers now hangs in the balance, trapped inside a frozen, starving pocket of hell.
Hitler, sitting hundreds and hundreds of miles away in his headquarters, flatly refused to break out. It was driven by pure ego. He forbade any retreat and made a fateful promise. He would keep the Sixth Army supplied entirely from the air. It was a promise he had no way of keeping. The entire plan was a total disaster. The promised air bridge, it delivered only a tiny fraction of what the army needed just to survive, let alone fight. Then a relief force, led by one of Germany's best generals, von Manstein. It was beaten back before it could even get close. The trap was sealed shut.
And inside that pocket, the grim reality set in. As the brutal Russian winter tightened its grip, the Sixth Army just disintegrated. They were starving. They were freezing to death. They had no fuel, no ammunition, and they were completely surrounded.
Finally, on February 2nd, 1943, the inevitable happened. The last remnants of the once mighty Sixth Army surrendered. For the first time in the entire war, a German field army had been completely wiped out. The psychological shockwave around the world was immense.
Stalingrad wasn't just a defeat, it was a strategic catastrophe for Germany. They lost hundreds of thousands of their best soldiers and equipment they could never replace. And from this moment forward, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front, it belonged to the Soviet Union. They were now on the long, bloody road to Berlin.
Which brings us to our final question. The war would rage for 2 more bloody years, of course, but, many historians argue that the path to Germany's ultimate defeat began right here, in the frozen rubble of Stalin's city. Was this the moment the war was truly lost for Hitler? What do you think?